Awesome. Well, good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to our Design Entrepreneurship virtual Fireside chats. My name is Dawn Mays. I'm the Director of Design Entrepreneurship and Inclusion at Kent State University's Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative. I know that is a mouthful, but this is a very new position and initiative. That was rolled out where I started in 2023. And the role is to be able to bring more minorities into the architecture profession. And throughout my research, what I've learned with interviewing minority firm owners, as well as talking with students and reading books, is that there is a lot to be learned when it comes to running your own practice. And based off of real firm owners, I gleaned a lot of insight on how to be able to sustain your business. And what I found so insightful was that many of them had various business models of how they've been able to sustain their practice throughout the years while still keeping their creative freedoms of the things that they would love to design within their practice. And so that is how this design entrepreneurship fireside chat was birthed, to be able to bring to you firsthand real firm owners to share their success stories of how they've been able to maintain their businesses through various business models. So the first one we talked last week was dealing with real estate and owning your own building. On Monday, we talked with a firm owner who had a boutique firm. So talking about small operations and the pros and cons of that. And tonight, I am so happy to bring my sorority sister, my fellow architect designer, Devanne Pena. So I'm going to read a little bit about her before we get started. So Devanne Pena is an architect entrepreneur. She is proud to be among the first 400 African-American women living history to be licensed to practice architecture. A fourth generation Cape Verdean, Devanne conducted independent research in her native West African islands to define future architectural service for the culture. She is the owner of a design practice, ArchiDev PLLC, and the founder of AfroSpace, a brick and mortar concept located in East Charlotte. Her mission is to design sustainable and safe spaces as a solution to the invisible struggles Black and Brown women face every day. So if you want to give a virtual hand clap to Ms. Devanne Pena, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored. This is awesome.
Awesome, awesome. So before we get started, if you've never used Zoom before, just some housekeeping here. This is going to be a dialogue of us asking questions and really taking a deep dive into the business model of Devanne. But if you have any questions that arise, you don't have to wait until the end. Please drop them in the chat. Our goal is to leave about 15 minutes at the end of this conversation to be able to answer those. If for some reason we have 50 questions unanswered, our goal is to be able to answer those and post them at a later date. Okay, so let's get into it. So what my first question to you, Devanne, is what year did you become licensed?
2016.
2016. Okay. So in 2016, please tell us, is that when you wanted to start your firm? But if not, when did you decide that you wanted to be a business owner?
That's an interesting question. I think in 2016 and from 2007 when I started my freshman year at NC State till I got licensed, like that's all I had eyes for was just getting licensed. And I didn't really think about beyond that because it was such like a huge undertaking. So I didn't really think beyond what that could be. I was just living it. And then once I got licensed, I thought about, okay, now I'm licensed, what's next? I was working at a commercial firm, like a huge A&E firm, architecture and engineering firm. And I was kind of getting corralled in the project management direction versus my goal was to be a project designer. But I got told that, everybody wants to be a designer. You should be a project manager. And I didn't want that for myself. So that's when things started changing for me. And I started my firm, or at least really it was just a business filing a LLC when I got my first project. And it was a conceptual design project. It was for a music studio that was going to be a tiny, like, made out of containers. So it's been a lot of trial and error, especially with clients that, I think when you start out, they see you as, post grad kind of young person that's just going to do the work. And a lot of the times it's a balance between building your own credibility and your own understanding about architecture to get the kind of independence and confidence that you can practice even after getting licensed. Sometimes there's a disconnect there as far as feeling like, okay, do I really know how to put together a construction set? So my eyes were mostly on single family residential. I just always, in school, I love single family residential. I just think like the most interesting and personal designs are homes. And I just wanted to, I've always wanted to design homes. And I knew, like, you don't have the as much coordination with engineers. You could kind of do them independently. So that was my first kind of focus on projects. And I actually didn't get my first like real commission for a real house that's going to be built in the world, not somebody's like dream into that they own the land and they've done the survey and all the good stuff, like until last year, honestly. So I've even in 2016 and when I started my firm, sorry, in 2018, I still worked at offices in between that time. So it was kind of like a freelance kind of thing on the side until it wasn't.
Okay, no, thank you for sharing that. So you got your license in 2016, and in 2018 you said, "Okay, I'm going to get this LLC because someone came to me and said, 'Hey, I want you to design this.'" Oh shoot, I need an actual business, to do it. All right. So it sounds like you were kind of one foot in and one foot out at the time, right? So like you had your firm, but you weren't really comfortable with saying this is all I'm going to do. So were you actually working at a firm, or were you like contracted in different capacities at various firms throughout the city?
Yeah. My path is crazy. Like, and that's why I'm like, sometimes I hesitate to feel like I can give advice because I don't know if I would follow, I don't know if 35-year-old Devin would follow the advice that Devin in 2026, so 26-year-old Devin did. So I got licensed when I was 26. And then in 2017, I actually quit my job and I went to the Cape Verde Islands, so where my family's from, because I felt like, again, I was kind of being corralled into the project management pipeline, and that wasn't what I wanted. But I hadn't had my hands in design deeply in a long time. So I knew one day the biggest goal I had, or like the kind of biggest dream I had, was to build in Cape Verde. So I quit my job to go move there and live there for 3 months. And I learned the Creole language they speak, and I just reconnected to my culture. And I was like, I won't build there right now, but I know that getting there is an interim process. Like, consider it this long pre-design of like understanding the people and how they conduct their lives and live there. Like, my family's fourth generation, so even my grandparents hadn't been to Cape Verde, so it was a big thing for me. And I just felt like I have my license now, so I could come back, and if I have to work in the middle of Wisconsin, that's fine. Like, I have some job security. So I just went out and I ended up traveling to Cape Verde and beyond. So I went all over. Um, and then I had a concept with a friend called the Livelihood Neighborhood, which was going to be housing and like work study for unhoused youth and young adults. And we just had, that was the kind of like first like innovative concept that I really like worked on with a partner. We were like excited about it. When I got back to the States, it was just like the timeline to develop it was too much. I need to survive. Like, I came from a single parent background, so I had to sustain myself. So I ended up getting a job at a firm in Florida. As a design architect actually was the title of the role, but the experience was not exactly. I did get to design my first project like at a firm, which was really cool. Like they just gave it to me to design, and it was really a circumstantial thing. It was because they had all of these, it was a shopping complex, and then they had a few independent buildings, and they had people on every one of them, and they really just didn't have the capacity to just to design another freestanding building. So they let me take a stab at it, and they loved it, and the client loved it. It was a brewery actually. Um, However, they didn't invite me to the meeting, and they invited the guy who sat next to me who had an associate's degree to present that project. And I didn't hear about the client even liking it or even knew that they went to a meeting until like weeks later. And they kind of like told like, oh, by the way, kind of thing. So yeah, I parted ways with them eventually.
Yes. So let me backtrack here to just commend you for one, for sharing your story today, because I think there's this misconception that architecture firms are just there, like, and boom, they come out the gate and they're making all this money, and all you see is the fruits of their labor now. But what you don't see is the reality of when they first started and how you had to go through growing pains and challenges to determine like what is best for you and how you want to operate your practice. And like you said, 26-year-old may not make the same, choices as Devin today, but I'm sure you've learned so much in, for one, what you wanted to do, what you wanted to design, what kind of clients. And so your story is valid. Your story is just as valuable as those where the golden doors have opened to them and they already have money, right? But the majority of us do not have, endless resources to start a business with no worry of failure because there's more money where that came from, right?
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing it, because I think your story is going to ring true to a lot of individuals that haven't even jumped off the cliff to start because they're just fearful of what could happen or what may not happen. So my question to you is, moving from that, when did you decide that, okay, I'm going to try this thing to be exclusive, like see as far as it can go?
Yeah. That's the thing too. I feel like if you don't, and I hate to like fall into this trope, and I know like a lot of people who quote unquote make it always talk about like, oh, I went through the gutter, like I had to do all this and that kind, but like I think if you grow up in communities where it's unheard of to even graduate college and start like a profession, and you've already made it that far, it's like you can do anything. So I had that mentality like I could do it. Like you have nothing to lose. There's no parents having investment in what you're doing. Like my mom she was taking care of business. She had to do what she had to do. But like as long as I graduated college, she really did not have any investment in like where I went with it, which it was like you could think about it in a lot of different ways, but it gave me freedom. Even in college, like I like I just was on my own. So like I feel like having a mentality, and this is my whole this is whole like a whole philosophy, but I think if you come from a certain neighborhoods and things like that, like if you have nothing to, I think it generates this I have nothing to lose mentality. But if you don't have experiences, I mean not experiences and like exposure and opportunities, that mentality can get you in a lot of trouble. But I think if you have experiences, exposure, and opportunities, that mentality can take you anywhere because you're just not afraid to risk. And like as you get older, which is like the new season I'm in now, like I'm learning how to manage everything just a bit better. But I think the strides that I was able to take and the risk, the lack of fear, part ignorance and part like just having nothing to lose. So I didn't really, I traveled across the world. I came back and I had to get a job. I moved to Florida and then the pandemic happened. So it was crazy because I never really intend, like, doing the architecture projects, I never really saw myself as I had an LLC, but it was like here and there I would get like contracts. So I think the biggest contract I had gotten was $3,000, and it was to do conceptual design for a multi-purpose center. And that was like my, my star in my cap, or my feather in my cap, was like, that was the biggest thing I had gotten to date. And that, I think that might have been like right before the pandemic. And it was a friend from college who was trying to come and turn into a developer. So he needed to like present information to bankers or whatever to get his loans, or investors and stuff like that. So yeah, I just got the idea. That's around the time I got the idea. 2020, I got the idea for Afrospace, which is my the self-care club, the kind of physical space that's in East Charlotte. And based off of my experiences in the workplace, and I lived in Austin for so long, it's just like I really missed the communal and connection that I felt in spaces that I felt safe in, where people that kind of had similar experiences can understand like kind of cultural things, or just like maybe a broader experience. So Black women, brown women, other people, other men, other genders, like just like a collaborative kind of collective experience. And the pandemic really shut things down, but I just felt this urge to continue, I feel like, as a calling. And I got an investor, and I know I'm like jumping, but like that's what really, the pandemic is really what made me go independent and pursue this Afrospace thing. And then that's when I got the first big architecture contract. And it's like, for me, it's big. Maybe from other, like my first contract, I think was 13,000. And then I got another one that same year for 13,000, and then another one for 13,000, which I'm like, who is paying me this much to do that? That's crazy. Like, and can I do it? Like, it's a mystery until you do it, and it's scary. It's so scary. But one of the projects they decided to drop, like not continue. The second project is getting permitted right now. Like the client already signed, and we have a contractor. And then the third project, the same thing. We just submitted for a permit. So like the fact that this is reality right now, and I get to kind of be creative and innovative about how I design this business of Afrospace to get it to be revenue positive and like be a sustainable, viable business model, and like use my design thinking and brain in that space. And then also the schematic, and through the full process of submitting to permit, and like having that technical experience that I really didn't want to go too far into, but I have it now, so I can navigate it. And then also now I'm literally at UNC Charlotte. I'm teaching a course here, the third year architecture studio. And to be able to teach design, to practice design, and like kind of iterate and innovate with design all at the same time, like it is burdensome. And I do have to figure out how to balance it every day, but it's such a blessing. And I don't think me at 26 would ever even imagine what this would be like. And I guess the last thing on this point is that I think because I never truly defined where I needed to go. Like I knew I had milestones, get licensed, eventually go off on my own, but I let kind of life and the experiences that felt like they were aligned take it there.
No, no, no. I appreciate you sharing that. So before we take a deeper dive in Afro space, and which we didn't speak to, but I believe I put it on the post about speaking about, you were also a lecturer. So you had content that you were able to share and then kind of go on a road trip. So can you explain to me, one, how did you come up with this lecture, right? How did
Nice
you
knowing
determine?
more about my life than I can remember. That's crazy. I was like, oh yeah.
Yes. And
Do
so
your
I'm
research.
like, I read up, girl. I got to do my research. But, being able to take a subject matter that you're passionate about and then say, hey, I want to market this. Can you walk us through what that's like, and how did you decide? Or did you have like
Yeah.
kind of helping you along the way with that?
Absolutely. Actually, yes. And I'm glad you said that there's someone helping me along the way, because mentorship has been vital. It was actually Catherine Williams when I got back from Cape Verde Island. She was like, you need to present what you did in Cape Verde at this conference, and it was at Berkeley, like the Berkeley. And I'm like, I don't, those are PhD people. I have a bachelor's. I don't think that's, and she was like, just submit it. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll try. So I put in context, and I contextualize because I never left architecture. Like I always see like it's not a departure, it's just a different understanding. And like I applied to the Wheelwright Prize from Harvard like 10 times. I never got it. So I was like, I'm gonna do my own self, initiated research in Cape Verde. So I called it Living Monuments. The I'm like the something of post independence, like post the architecture of post independence. So, for example, like in the States and in the South, we have in other parts of the country, we have these Confederate monuments, even though the Confederacy is in the past. It's similar to colonial, previously colonized countries where they have these colonial statues, and like their most significant architecture is colonial, even if they have their own independence. So I wondered, like, what is the architecture of the current times and the culture that's there, and it's the people. So I call it living monuments. So it's almost like an anthropological study as well as architecture. There's so many lenses that you can intersect with architecture, and that's what I love about it. So I put together a thesis and I submitted it to the Black Geographies Conference, and I presented there at Berkeley. And I decided to I had just lost my job. It was right as the pandemic went, and it was before we really knew anything. But I said I Googled, like, I was in Tampa at the time, Tampa to Oakland, and under the flight information it just had a map, and I felt like that feeling of like, oh my God, what if I drove? Because it had been years since I traveled, and I just felt like I had lost all the momentum. The thing with my partner, it didn't work out with the livelihood neighborhood because I had to deal with real life and make more money to sustain and support myself. So then it felt like I got this new opportunity to get to see. I'm just like I experienced the world. It's such a beautiful experience to me. So to be able to go across the country, and it was beautiful. Like, and I had an interview with NCARB. I remember it was for a travel position, so they ended up not doing it. But I had to chart my travel where by the time I had to figure out where I was going to be on my drive by the time I had my interview in DC. So it happened to be Phoenix. So I had to make sure I drove to Phoenix at the right time and date. I took a flight from Phoenix to DC and then back to Phoenix, and then drove from Phoenix to LA, and then LA to to
Oh
Oakland.
my
It
gosh.
was crazy.
Okay, so you were presenting to Berkeley and you was like, no, that's where the PhDs are. I don't have all of that. So like, how was that experience for you? And how did you decide to kind of market that to take it on the road?
I think because it got accepted, and I was like, well, if Berkeley's accepting it, then it's acceptable, and I'm just gonna ride off of that and be like, hey, this is it. And I also talked about my own journey too, because within the conversation about the living monuments, because my family's from Cape Verde, so it's not everything I do always has like a personal kind of lens to it. So when I think I spoke at the it was a no mask conference at University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee, and I did their keynote, and it was bringing in some of that information, but it was also kind of turning it into storytelling. So I used the hero's journey, which is like a literary tool to get through story. So every like kind of saga type of book where the hero starts and they go through something and then they have this journey, like I use that to outline the different parts of my journey, and then I use that as a tool to present. So I didn't keep it up. I
Wow.
only did a couple of them because life's, but I do want to get back into speaking, and I wonder if I use that same literary tool or device, that like what it would look like now.
No, I love that. Okay, so that's still a feather in your hat, right? Of being a lecturer. When did you get the opportunity to be a professor?
So it was like so I've been teaching for 3 semesters. So I started teaching in last fall, and the summer before that I was invited to sit on critiques at the end of their school year. And I know, and I've expressed that I wanted to teach. And I had a friend who got invited, friend and now fiance, who got,
Okay. Congratulations.
thank you. He was invited by because he's been in the city for 8 years, so he's very well connected to a lot of community people and like including UNC Charlotte. So he got invited to be on two people's panels, but it was the same critique. So the professor asked if someone else he knew of somebody else, so he referred me, and then I ended up I've just so again back to mentorship and networking. Right when like networking is so important, and like being able to talk about yourself and your accomplishments. And so the director of the architecture program was there, and I ended up in a casual conversation. He literally introduced me to every faculty member he could find. And I was just telling him about kind of my accolades. Like I told him about the presentation at Berkeley that had happened. I told him about, starting, I just got this architecture project. So we're just talking about like my intersection with architecture and like where I'm at now. And I told him about Afrospace and how I got an investor and all that. So he was just like, pretty geeked up about me. And then he was like, well, I don't know about this. Like, we're covered for this year, but next year. And I'm like, okay. And a week later, he said that there was a open position for the first year class, and if I would like to be there. So it worked out.
Wow, you were in the right place at the right time. But
I
also what I
said yes, and I was
appreciate,
being stingy.
yeah,
It's so easy to be stingy of your time when you don't have a lot and you don't have a lot of energy. But like sometimes it's like, okay, if I sit on these students' reviews, like it's giving them more diverse review. It's helping me to grow as a reviewer and like talk with students. And I think teaching part-time is such a good supplementary activity to do while you're growing in design because it helps you grow as a designer. And then it's also like, it's a consistent source of income to be real. So then it's like you can kind of be more flexible in your other goals, or have more stability while you are trying to like figure out your business or whatever. So that was kind of it all worked out. And I'm not trying to
yeah.
get on my pulpit, but it worked out
Yes, no, no,
pretty
no, that's
good.
amazing. I think pouring into young minds is great work anyway. Like it's always worth your time, especially for me as a Black woman, not necessarily seeing individuals that look like me or really affirming my work or for me to be able to ask questions.
Yeah.
Um, so being being that for someone else because I did not have that, I think is the greatest reward, to be able to do that or provide them with critiquing that uplifts them and actually helps them instead of like crushing their spirit, because I didn't always get that. And so to just be the change that you want to see is it pays off in itself. I so also appreciate, you sharing the importance of networking, right? And being able to speak on your accomplishments. I think a lot of times it is looked down upon like you're bragging if you are saying the things that you've done. But if nobody knows your work, how else are they going to know? For one, you got to be able to articulate it, right? And succinctly, right? Not talking to them for 30 minutes, but maybe 30 seconds or a minute, right? The second thing is networking. If your friend, now turned fiance, didn't know you, right? If you didn't, expand your network to meet new people and talk about them, and talk about your work, and they understand the thing, what you're passionate about, right? When he got asked that question, would you have been in that room, right? And so it's important. It's not just about you being in the room, but it's about having a circle of influencers and individuals that work in your industry, whether they're mentors or colleagues, or even mentees, right? That are in rooms where they're asking for specific things or designers or opportunities, and they're not necessarily able to do it, or they don't actually have the experience. Guess what they're going to think about? Their friends, right? People that are in their network. So it's so important to be able to expand and not work in that silo, which is so easy to do in architecture.
That's so
So
true.
I want to circle back to what you had talked about with Afrospace. being formulated in your mind in 2020. And so during the pandemic. So can you walk us through how it started off as a concept and how it has evolved into literally a brick and mortar open door, facility?
Yes. And just real quick to touch on what you just said, because you made me think of, I have mentors now that like before I got this project or while I had this project, I was like, how do I develop this to the detail that I need it to and make sure that I have it's like construction documents are so they're deep. They have a lot of layers to them. So I had asked the mentor, I was like, hey, I know you do single family. Could I see a past project that got approved by the city? And he just sent me his PDFs and I used it as a go by to infill like those general notes and all those other things I was missing. So anyway, that's the kind of point I wanted to make about that. And I've done that for some of my mentees who are starting to get projects. And they're like, oh, can you send me one of your proposals? I'm like, sure. So they have something to build their proposals off of and things like that. So it's really important. But yes, about Afrospace and the concept, like I was already in the work of giving back. I was doing something I called ArchiDev Incubators, and it was just a virtual chat for an hour with someone who had a business concept, and I would help the concept development because that's just something I'm good at. And I think designers are good at because we know how to frame things and think about things using the design process to kind of categorize and strategize of how to move forward and think creatively with new solutions. Like it's something that's embedded in how we think and operate. So I kept having these ideas that I knew were not for me to pursue. It just was like, or I'd feel frustration, like, oh, this is such a great idea. Like I would wake up with these ideas constantly. And I was like, well, I know other people have ideas. Maybe I could just help them with theirs to develop it since I'm not in the position to do that. So it was when I was working at the firm in Florida and I did it for free. I said it was free to the people. So anybody who heard about it or wanted, so I had a few people like in groups that I met up with. There was one like Latina, like a brunch group or something, and they wanted to expand their business. There was a guy who did a creative studio or creative agency that did videography, photography, and he wanted to open a coffee shop, and his dad owned a building. It was like this whole thing. So I just did like a workshop with them. So anyway, along these workshops, I just got the idea of Afrospace because I wasn't being stingy with my energy. I think that's like the kind of like you have to balance. You can't just give it away all the time, but like you also know if you have this gift, it's to be shared. And I did that for free because I am always have a heart of service and I didn't have the capacity to like be on anybody's, volunteer committees or anything like that. I had to step back from being the editor of the magazine. Like I didn't have the bandwidth. So I was like, well, I can do it when I can do it. And I came up with this concept. I was like, okay, well, what if you could have a space where you could do your hair together because natural hair nowadays is so DIY. I do my hair all the time. Like I barely ever go to a salon and salons are very transactional now. They're not the kind of community cornerstones that they used to be of like safe spaces that were really community based spaces. So I asked myself like what's the modern answer to that space? What does a contemporary cornerstone look like that is anti-gentrification in a post-gentrification world? Like what does a space that can be viable, that can be meaningful for a community look like now? Like what does it look like from an inclusivity standpoint? Like who is there? How do you make people feel safe and how do you still make it welcoming to everybody? Like all these things, I was just going through the motions and I looked at it like I was a student, like a design problem. I really was not even thinking about a business at all. And then in it was February. Okay, so technically I had the idea at the end of 2019 because it was October 2019. I still remember. So anyway, February 2020, there was a Black History Month special on PBS. I didn't have cable. That she was trying to save her points. And it was about Black entrepreneurship through the time. So it went from the like post Reconstruction and everything that's happened in this country when we try to build up and it gets burned down. And it was so tragic, but then it had this hopeful end to it, talking about the future and like where people are building now. And there was all these investors and they were talking about venture capital, and they had these Black venture capital groups, and I just wrote all their names down and I looked them up online, and I found Backstage Capital, who was ran by a Black queer woman, Arlen Hamilton.
I
And
met her. Yes.
you did. So see, and you just got to be bold. You just got to be like, I have nothing to lose by this. So I DM'd her, and this was before she was on like Forbes and Fortune Company, or what, Fast Company and Fortune 500, all that stuff. Before she did all of that, so I just was like, "Hi, I'm looking for a mentor." So mentorship was central. So I was, and I've there's so many opportunities that I got because of mentorship. Anyway, long story short, she replied and told me I should sign up for her course. And I'm like, that's fine. So I looked, and there was two courses. There was one that was just the course for like $300, and there's one that had two one-on-one sessions with her, and it was $900. And I was like, ooh. At the time, my credit was amazing at this because I was still coming off that corporate life. So what I
Yes.
did was put it on PayPal credit, and I paid it off over 6 months. But I knew it was the right investment. Like, I just trusted it. I felt it in my heart, in my spirit. Like, this is it. So when I was able to connect with her one on one, she was like all about this idea for Afrospace concept. Like, at the time, it was like there was going to be an Afro barista, and it was going to be like a bar, like kind of like at a froyo place where you can like put together products that based on your texture. So I did all this research on like all of that, what that would take. And she told me, she was like, well, I want to, after a few calls, after we build a rapport, and it was by talking myself, like, just, she saw the strategy and the depth that I've researched this thing. And like, it reminds me how my students now, like when they present their work, like there's a through line from where they started to where they are now. And I literally presented just like that. And it was after a few conversations, and I had did some things for her. She asked me like my opinion on some, like on a Black owned like a crowdfunding website for Black owned startups. And I did like a UX review on it as far as like how I felt as a user going through this website. And I sent her my notes, and like I was trying to show up like really to like, hey, I'm invested in this time and all. And she said, hey, I want to invest, like privately invest $5,000 in your business. And I was like, what? Like, and it just blew my mind. And the fact that it was her. So anyway, long, like 6 months passed. I haven't heard anything. I haven't gotten my $5,000. So I'm like, what do I do? So I went to the site, and there's no longer an option to do a one-on-one call with her. So theoretically, she could act like that never existed because there was no evidence that I had a second call with her. And now she's like skyrocketed. So I'm like, okay. So I just boldly again reached out to her assistant and was like, hey, can I get the two? I remember I put like 2-2-1:1, like trying to be all in like the Silicon Valley talks. I was like, can I get my 2 out of 2 one-on-one with Arlen? And she scheduled it for the day. It was the day before Thanksgiving. And the first thing she told me was, I know I said I was going to invest 5,000, but we actually just invested in a similar company. And she couldn't remember. She started to say the name, but she couldn't remember what it was. And I remembered it because I've been doing my like competition research. I was like, oh, you're talking about and now I can't remember what it's called, but it's a blow bar for Black hair in Dallas. And I differentiated in that moment. I was like, well, they do hair, we're not a salon. We're not a salon service. It's a space, it's a safe space that you can do all these DIY things in. It's a concept space for people to develop their business. Like, I showed her more of my background work. And on that same call, she went from literally from 5,000 to $0 to 25,000. And she invested $25,000 in my business in January 2021.
That is a phenomenal story. Okay. You need to write about that. Okay. Uh I want to I know we'll be getting a question soon. Okay. So once she invested the $25,000, is that the seed money that you needed to be able to get to the next step, which is like identifying a space, opening the doors, creating the programming, or was there additional funding needed for that?
You asked such good questions. There was additional funding needed. I actually raised with the help of friends, but predominantly like me led. I did a crowd fund, and I raised 15,000 on a crowd fund. Beyond that, and actually, the 25,000 was intended to invest into a crowd fund so that I could like raise those millions that venture raises. But to me, I was like, that's not, no. First of all, I've never seen this amount of money in my account. I'm not about to put it all into a crowdfund. And it just didn't feel, I had to like, and going against the suggestion of someone like that was like crazy feeling. But I knew in my heart and I knew the feeling like it just wasn't what it's supposed to be. Because there's so many of these startups that have these concepts. It's so, in 2020, I will say it was easy to raise and it was easy to sell a dream and you'll get this investment. But then what happens to the idea, especially in a physical space? And it was so important for me to know what that physical space was going to be. So the 25,000 plus my 15K, that got me, yeah, finding the lease. And I went through, it was a whole journey trying to find a lease. That's another thing. But I found the space. But really she asked me that. I mean, she invested that at the begin. Like I literally just had an idea. I had no traction, which means like, early users or like, signs of adoption. I had none of that. It was just off of an idea. And she just trusted that and took a chance on me. Um, and so did everybody who donated to my campaign. So it took even I think it was like another year until I found my space. But I'm also trying to survive. I just moved back I didn't have a job in Florida. I had to leave Florida. I was staying at an Airbnb. I went home. Home situation wasn't what it should be. So I had to find a place to like half of the time I was building my business, I didn't have a place to live. So I was like jumping from couches to France to this. And it was very chaotic. And then I still decided to go. So my family's from Massachusetts originally. So I was like, I'm gonna go see my family. Like it's post pandemic, like I haven't seen them. And this isn't the best use of money right now, but I need this. So I went and on the plane I met the CEO of Junior Achievement and I was telling her about Afrospace. And I told her that, I need a part-time job so I can like get an apartment and just be like, be stable while I'm trying to and have a stable home space. Cause like your hierarchy of needs, like having a stable home is so important for you to be able to grow and develop things. Um, so yeah, I got a part-time job at Junior Achievement for like a year. And then that's what kind of supported me until I got this position here. So it's just, and even still, like, it's still like, I'm waiting for the next architecture contract because getting the business to break even financially, like from the expenses and revenues, it's a process and it takes a while. So I don't think this journey, at least the way that I've taken it, is built for every single person. And yeah, some people have that golden door, like you were saying, but if you are, I'd hope that like for other people and like next generations, it would be easier to develop. And actually, Afrospace has developed into this concept space. So many people have come to the space wanting to, like, hey, I have this idea for this business, or I have this. Like, just today, I was talking with someone who's doing a photography cohort, and then someone else who wants to do a matcha shop. And it's like, oh, Afrospace actually can be this space where you test out your idea before you have to invest into your own infrastructure. And it's like a jumping off point, and like that's kind of a new lens that I'm looking at it now. So I guess the takeaway is that it's always evolving as far as like what the offering needs to be based off of like what the demand and like what what I'm seeing is, and then always still being rooted in community and started with trying to address those invisible needs and those invisible kind of burdens that Black and brown women take on every day. So
No, I love that. So, can you give us a brief description of like what is Afro space? If someone wanted to utilize the space, like is there memberships? Like explain to us how it works.
yeah, so also in development right now, I literally just hired a brand person. But I describe it as a work club, a self-care club, and a social club. So it's membership based, but you can drop in with the day pass and then you can run it for your own needs and your own to develop your own concept. And if it's aligned with what we're doing, then we can incorporate it in with our members. Like, so if it's like a matcha pop up or something like that, it's about building partnerships. But yeah, it's a membership based self care club.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Okay. And let me see, because we want to leave time for some questions from the audience. All right. What are some things that you've learned about yourself as a business owner?
Hmm. That's a good question. Myself as a business owner.
Top two things.
You said what are two things?
Top two things. Yep.
Top two things. Trusting myself is the way to go every time, like trusting myself and it's around the corner. I know there's like I don't know, like I just you hold on and it's right around like everything just falls into place. So what I'm learning is not to stress the entire way until it falls into place. Because time after time again, it's fallen into place. And I'm better learning to manage how I manage myself in that kind of walk to get there rather than stress about it every single day. It's like do what's manageable and you'll get there.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, like know your wheelhouse of control. You can't control everything. So what can you do to contribute and then kind of let everything else fall into place?
And
All
you know,
right.
and not to call myself out, but you know that too, because last year I was supposed to come out to Kent and
Yes.
talk, and I just was having a total melt. I was like, I can't do it. And you were so like compassionate towards me. But like it was I could not handle. And I'm just learning to better handle my mental health, my priorities, and just even my own discipline. And it's as I'm becoming, I think the process is the process no matter what. So you have to be present in it and know that it's also, yeah, it's totally developing you as a person as well. And that's what matters at the end of the day is like your character, not the money and success that you have in that respect to me.
Oh, no, absolutely. Thank you for that. All right, last question before we open it up. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. But last question is, what advice would you give to someone that wants to be a design entrepreneur?
Hmm. I think the first piece of advice we've already talked about mentorship and network. Those are huge, but it's being a learner, learning something to like pursuing and really investigating something to a core so that even if it's a no, like and know that there will be dead ends to that, but it's part of the process and you always take something forward with you. So like I said earlier, like I went into the like to the 10th degree of trying to figure out like these hair thing. I was making hair stuff in my kitchen. I don't do nothing with hair now, but like it's part of the process. It got us to where we are. I think that's probably the biggest um takeaway that I can think of right now.
No, 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 that's great. And then I just want to say or one last question, really last question. How can individuals support Afrospace? Because it sounds like it is an incubator space. It's still in the early stages. You are still trying to secure funding to be able to support programming at Afrospace, right?
Yes, absolutely. We have a donation channel. You can also purchase what do you call it? Like coupons. If you know anybody in Charlotte that needs workspace or needs event space, you can bless them with a gift. But then we also have I have a QR code that I can share that you can if you're ready to
Oh
look
yeah,
at
I'll share it for you.
that name.
Yes, yes. So, can you share like what are the things that people can give to?
Yeah, so if you click on this and you scroll down to the bottom of it's not very far, but it just says help Afrospace grow. It's basically helping us to break even um, in 2025. So it has, if you press give, it has $5, $10, or a custom amount. Is that what you
Awesome.
meant by that? Or did you
Yes,
mean?
ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Any amount,
Awesome.
any amount helps.
No, no, no. Thank you. So, I want to open it up. Are there any questions about Devanne's journey, about Afrospace, about lecturing, about starting your business? You can either come off mute or you can actually type it in the chat if you don't want to come off mute. Let me see. I don't have anything in there yet. While we're waiting, I'll also say I've conducted a lot of interviews with minority firm owners here in Northeast Ohio. And actually, I interviewed Melva Williams Argall. I don't know if you've met her before, but she's based out of Columbus. But she talked about, or how she described entrepreneurship was, and I'm dating myself here, going to the arcades in the mall. And there's this game where you are hitting the top of the hippos' heads, to knock them down. And she used that as an analogy of that's business. My job isn't to knock it down where it never comes back. I know in business there's always going to be things that pop up, and so my job is to actually just manage all of the things that are popping up, not to solve everything. And I was like, oh, that sounds so simple. I mean, I'm sure it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But what do you think of that? Would you use that as an analogy? Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, I think that's pretty. I mean, there's always things that come up. I think it just made me think like, I think it's on us to figure out our how we work and how we can show up to that hippo game the best we can. Because if you're disoriented and just frazzled and already stressed and angry, like you're gonna miss a lot of those little hippo heads. Like I think like if you prioritize your self-care and your mental health and not to the like and be deliberate about how you address burnout and like things like that because it's inevitable. It's like it's a tough road, but like I think having perspective of being like, hey, I can wake up and have a really long breakfast and watch an episode of Living Single and then tap into work if I want to. Like that's a privilege that I love. Like I love that I can tap in, but I still need a schedule where it's not like totally different times every day kind of thing. And I have ADHD, like I have anxiety, like there's things that are, neurodivergent issues that I deal with every day. So like learning to manage that and be in business and the up and downs of internally and mentally, and then on top of that, the up and downs of entrepreneurship and learning how to be healthy in that process is definitely putting I'll say discipline like in how I operate, and it's made a big difference, a really big. Because when I first started out, I don't know if I just was excited that I didn't have to go to work at a certain time, but I was like staying up till like 9 in the morning, awake, and thinking I'm just like process, like I'm being a like a mad genius, and it's like no, sis, like get some sleep. That's ridiculous. You're actually you're actually having
Right.
an episode. You need to
Yeah,
relax.
that's that misconception of like, if I burn the midnight oil, that's architecture school. If I burn the midnight oil, I could get all this stuff done. But really, you're delirious in the middle of the night. You're not your best. You're not
Yeah.
going to be the sharpest that you could be, and you make mistakes. And so it's better to just get the rest. Get the
And
rest.
like do the work in increments and do what works for you. It's like, yeah, it's a whole I'm still learning it, but I'm doing way better than I was.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Well, I do want to thank you so much. Oh, we got a question. Tiana, you can come off mute.
Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to say hello. I met you back at my UWM days. But I just wanted to come and see what you had going on. And I also just started a business, so wanting to know more about, like for me, my business is more at the intersection of tech and design. And so I just recently started to do pitch competitions, but one of the business coaches that I went to her webinar, she was like, you should be careful with your business before you get like the copyright agreements or trademarks or whatever it is. Did you have to consider those things when you were starting to look for money and starting to figure out partnerships and hiring?
I think it's actually very common for that to be a fear. Like I think like cuz I've been through a handful of cohorts and stuff, and that's like a question that we all ask all the time about like, well, if I share this idea, should I get, if I'm presenting in front of investors, should I get them to sign an NDA? Like what is the kind of mechanics to that? And honestly, the best advice that I heard was just like don't even worry about that, because when you are, and yes, like getting things, it depends what your product or your service is, of course, like if you should get something patented, if it's something very revolutionary or something like that, and that's actually traction for your bit, or like that's actually something in your business that you can put in your pitch decks. But I would say like it takes a lot, as I'm sure you're realizing it as you build your business, it takes a whole lot and there's a whole lot more. So even if someone's worst case scenario were like, oh, I'm going to take this idea and development, the fact that you're already at the point of speaking with people who are, for investors, it's like your trajectory is going to be so different. And like it takes a while for people to or for your business to turn into what it needs to be, and you're at it every day, that kind of thing. I think like maybe your name you can get trademarked, but that I know that stuff is expensive. I had Afro Space's name trademarked. I need to reapply for the thing because I let it lapse. But yeah, I think there's so many businesses that are so similar. So unless it's something that's like super duper unique and it's like a piece of tech that is going to revolutionize something, I wouldn't let that give me fear as far as like sharing my work. Like you got to be smart about it, but when it comes to investors, like you don't have to worry about the NDAs and things like that. Like you present it, and if they're into it, they'll let you know, and if they're not, they won't. So
Awesome. Oh, and before I forget, can you also let people know how to get in touch with you? So if they want to hear your lecture, if they want to learn more about Afrospace, would you be able to drop it in the chat? You can say it also for the recording, but also drop it in the chat, your email, drop the website of Afrospace, so people can continue this conversation.
yeah, so my email is dev@afro.space. The website is also afro.space. Super easy. It's also under construction, but this season I've had to, I'm sorry, I'm trying to type it. I've had to focus on the school because I was like, before I accepted the teaching position, I was like, you only have a finite amount of energy and time. And I was like, okay, I could either be comfortable until the end of the semester by teaching this, or I can be out here living this entrepreneurial life. And I had been doing it for the whole year. So I was like, you know what? Or I guess I looked for the summer until now. I was like, I just want to feel a little secure for a while because it's okay. And that's actually a piece of advice I would say. It was like it's okay to go back and like collect yourself or collect some coin and then get back to it, as long as you have like a vision and you can see that there's progress being made, whether that's through how your business is being adopted or like being seen by others. Like that's a big part of it too. Like I think if I saw that Afrospace was not working out, I would not continue to pursue it. But there's signs and there's like um data that supports it, even though this season I feel like I've had to put it on the shelf in order to like manage. I got the 2 architecture contracts, I had the school. I was like, I can't even do it. And it feels crazy to put something that I called my calling and my dream on the back burner. But I truly think like I'm still developing. I'm like, nothing is done in vain. And I've been able to still, even with me not being active, I've been able to connect with so many people about it and like kind of foster these relationships for this residency program that I'm starting at Afrospace. Like things are still moving. It's just not in the pace that I initially started at. And I think like finding acceptance in that is where I'm at right now. I know nobody asked that question, but that's what I felt like saying.
No, but I appreciate you sharing that because again, this is important to like remove the virtual curtain, right? To see what's really happening behind the scenes and what it looks like and how there are like real issues with having your own business. It's not always the customers are beating down the door, right? But what I appreciate about, although you had to put it on the back burner, it is because you want to be able to keep Afrospace as you designed it, right? And not wanting to, and being true to the original design and the intent behind the design. And
Yeah.
the way you have to do that is by other avenues of income until you get the right funder, you get the right opportunity that's going to draw in the community that you desire to impact the most.
Yes, that's so good. And it's not told like I have it on Peer Space, so I get event rentals and things like that that are supplementing. So like Peer Space is like Airbnb for event spaces. So people can automatically book it. It's very easy for me to do. And I've been getting those pretty consistently, but it's
Oh,
not
pause.
all the way
Can you
there.
Can you post that in the chat? Because I've never heard of a Airbnb for rental spaces.
Yeah,
I wonder if they have that. Is it all over the United States or just in Charlotte? Okay.
everywhere. Yep. And they
All right,
do
you got me
photography.
excited.
That's actually, I met with a photographer today and she was like, she let me borrow her C stands, which are like these big equipment and this big old roll. She's like, I don't even use them anymore. So we're keeping them in Afro space. And that's another offering I can give is like, because we have great daylight. So it's like a daylight photography studio now that I can also add as an offering on Peerspace. So, and she let me
Wow.
have that for free and a big old light. And I don't know how to use any of that stuff, but like, just for photographers to come in and use the space. So I really just want it to be a space where people can express themselves creatively and build their businesses.
No, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I know it's after 6, so I want to thank you, Miss Devon, for the opportunity to learn more about Afrospace. You are doing amazing work in Charlotte. The next time I'm there, I definitely have to walk past because y'all, I posted on LinkedIn her headshot, and she has this backdrop of Afro Space with the logo. Like, it is definitely a selfie moment. But I really just appreciate the safe space that you're creating for Black women in your community. I appreciate you using your gifts of, your initial gifts of incubation and being able to expand beyond you as a person to be able to create a brick and mortar space for young entrepreneurs and innovative minds to be able to have a space to come in and be able to brainstorm to figure out what their next chapter is. And I am sure Afrospace is going to be the biggest thing in Charlotte. It's the best kept secret right now. And I really am excited to see the future of where this goes. So I want to thank everybody for attending tonight. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your questions. This is being recorded, so we will be able to share it with the NOMA chapters. When you receive it, please share, share, share. If you joined us late, we had 2 other design entrepreneurship chats. One last week dealing with real estate. Earlier this week, we dealt with boutique firms, and today we talked about Afrospace. This is so important to have this dialogue to be able to build the next pipeline of firm owners by equipping you guys with resources and how to be able to structure your business and be able to ask these firm owners questions on how to do so. So again, thanks everybody for attending and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.